How's everyone doing today? I see smiles, so it looks good. All right, my name is Jocelyn Broman. I am a We the People alumni. I competed at nationals in 2006, a very, very, very long time ago, or at least it feels that way. I currently work on Capitol Hill for Representative Don Young as a legislative assistant. I've been up there for about 5 years. And that was after I came up here, after I went to law school. So I'm also an attorney, so you get to deal with that part as well. So we're looking forward to your presentation and excited to ask the question. Next, Judge.
All right. Hello, my name is Evan Gessner. I'm an attorney down in Lexington, South Carolina, where I handle civil rights claims and personal injury and injury to property claims occasionally too. This is my first year judging nationals, though I've been judging the state competitions now for probably 12 or 13 years. So excited to be here and looking forward to your presentation.
And I am Francine Engel. I am a political scientist, and I focus on American constitutional development. And I currently work with the Maryland Council for Civic and History Education. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
If you could introduce yourselves and also let us know who your teacher is.
Good afternoon. We are Reno High School Unit 3. My name is Emma Peak, and I'll be attending the University of Nevada.
My name is Owen Watson, and I will also be attending the University of Nevada.
My name is Soha Rayhan, and I will be attending the University of Nevada.
And my name is Maitane Wooden, and I too will be attending the University of Nevada.
Getting that in-state tuition, I see. Good job, guys. I did not do that, so very smart. Sorry, go ahead.
All good. Our unit coach is Dr. Matthew Oakes, and our teacher is Mr. Richard Clark.
Wonderful. All right, Unit 3. Today you get to do question 1. So for the benefit of everyone, I will read the question and then you'll be able to begin when ready. Oliver Wendell Holmes once said, "I do not think that the United States would come to an end if we lost our power to declare an act of Congress void. I do think the Union would be imperiled if we could not make that declaration as to the laws of the several states." End quote. What impact has judicial review had on federalism? Is judicial review a counter-majoritarian practice? Please support your position. And what limits, if any, would you place on the practice of judicial review? Please begin when you're ready.
By denying any one government complete jurisdiction over all the concerns of public life, federalism protects the liberty of the individual from arbitrary power. When government acts in excess of its lawful powers, that liberty is at stake. Justice Kennedy outlines the essence of federalism in his cert petition opinion in the 2011 case, Bond versus United States.
By removing partisanship and allowing the court to be the ultimate judges of federalism, the practice of judicial review is counter-majoritarian, which is a system in which popular opinion can either be supported or ignored through governmental action. Because of this, public opinion should not be used to place restraints on judicial review, and any restrictions should be institutional.
Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes asserts that the Supreme Court must be able to declare an act of state void, but not necessarily an act of Congress. However, as Justice Marshall stated in the majority opinion of the 1803 case Marbury versus Madison, removing judicial review would be giving to the legislature a practical and real omnipotence with the same breath which professes to restrict their powers within narrow limits. The Supreme Court must retain its independence and authority over both the states and the federal government in order to preserve the delicate balance of federalism enshrined in the Constitution.
The 10th Amendment reserves rights for the states, allowing for retention of state sovereignty, as seen in 1992 through New York versus United States, which ruled that coercing states into assuming liability for waste was unconstitutional.
However, judicial review has also allowed the judicial branch to expand federal power to limit states' authority. Through the doctrine of incorporation, states have been prohibited from violating the excessive fees and fines clause of the 8th Amendment through Timms versus Indiana in 2018.
The writtenness of the Constitution protects counter-majoritarianism and federalism through several clauses. The authority of the court is upheld by Article 3 through the Law and Equity Clause, which implies the practice of judicial review. Additionally, Article 1 allows the states to determine the times, places, and manners of their elections, but also includes that Congress has the power to alter these regulations.
Counter-majoritarian practices have been instituted into the court in an effort to protect the liberties of the individual. not to favor the states nor the federal government, making the Supreme Court the ultimate arbiter of federalism. In 2013, the court ruled in United States versus Windsor that Section 3 of the Defense Marriages Act, which denied federal recognition of same-sex marriage, was unconstitutional. Similarly, the 2015 ruling in Obergefell versus Hodges determined that the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment protected individuals from state laws prohibiting same-sex marriages.
Because judicial review is a counter-majoritarian practice, we believe it must not be subverted by the other two branches of government. Restrictions on the judicial branch ought to exist, but must be determined from inside the court to prevent either the states or the federal government from obtaining an advantage.
Article 3 outlines that the court must be an appellate court except for its narrow original jurisdiction. Further, the Purcell principle, established by the court in 2006 through Purcell versus Gonzalez, determined that the Supreme Court will not grant cert during the period just before an election. Additionally, in 2019, Rucho versus Common Cause set the precedent that the Supreme Court will not hear cases of partisan gerrymandering, allowing the states more authority over their redistricting practices.
As Alexander Hamilton stated in Federalist 78, the courts of justice are to be considered as the bulwarks of a limited constitution against legislative encroachments. Whether the court is judging a legislative encroachment of a state or of the federal government, the practices of counter-majoritarianism and internal checks must ultimately uphold the stability of federalism. Thank you.
So you're making this argument that it's actually individual liberty that wins. But I'm not quite buying it yet. So doesn't it mean that when the Supreme Court strikes down state regulations and state laws that automatically the federal government gets more power?
Yes, it does mean this because, as shown through Loving versus Virginia, it did allow the federal government some more regulations. However, it did expand individual rights to interracial marriages much more than it actually gave the federal government power, therefore protecting the liberties of the individual much more.
Additionally, a case called Meyer versus Nebraska showed that the federal government did protect a person's right to teach the German language. And this is also protected under the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. So even though, yes, it is federal power that's making these happen, it's still protecting mostly the individual right.
Additionally, in Article 6, the Constitution outlines the supremacy of the national government over the state governments. Our position is that the states is very similar to that of Justice Brandeis, which saw the states as a laboratory of democracy. We see that as laboratories that when they fail, the federal government has to reign over the states and take control over their malpractice.
When has the Supreme Court limited individual liberty?
The Supreme Court sometimes makes rulings. For example, in Shelby County versus Holder, you could see that the individual's right to vote and in many ways was restricted because they had ruled that Section 4B of the Voting Rights Act was unconstitutional. And so in some cases, you do see that the judiciary's decisions do limit the individual instead of broaden their rights.
Doesn't that undermine your argument? So doesn't that undermine your argument?
No, absolutely not. When individual rights are limited under a collective right, that does not limit the individual, but rather promotes a common good, such as in the 1929 case, United States versus Miller, the Supreme Court saw an collective right to bear arms through the prefatory clause of the Second Amendment, where that was overturned by District of Columbia versus Heller because popular interpretation has changed over the Second Amendment to encapsulate an individual right to bear arms.
Okay, thank you.
Unmute myself there real quick. Would any of you propose any sort of change in the judicial nomination or confirmation process?
the supermajority, in order to confirm justices, should be brought back in order to limit partisanship in appointing justices on the bench. As we saw in the confirmation of Justice Amy Coney Barrett, the Democrats in the Senate didn't even show up to her nomination because they felt that their votes didn't even matter. And if we brought back this supermajority, it would allow for bipartisanship and compromise on justices rather than parties taking over the confirmation process.
Additionally, with
ahead.
confirmation hearings, it becomes very political. And this was seen through how Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell did vow to block any President Obama nominee. And since it's so political, the people on opposite sides do say that the other is infringing on people's constitutional rights.
I disagree with my colleagues. I do not believe that we should bring back the filibuster for judicial appointments. Instead, we should institute change into the Supreme Court, such as the bill that Representative from California, Khanna, introduced to Congress to institute an 18-year term limit on the Supreme Court, and then have Supreme Court justices cycle on circuit courts if they so desire, which does fit in the realm of Article 3, Section 2 of the Good Behavior Clause of the Constitution.
How do theories of constitutional interpretation, how do they influence the practice of judicial review, if at all?
Well, how you interpret the Constitution does have an impact on how you use it. However, this does not mean that a person's interpretation of the Constitution supersedes the opinion of the other justices. They have internal checks where the justices will converse with each other to make sure that the way that they're interpreting the Constitution is, in fact, the way that the majority of people would agree with.
However,
and compared to other countries like the Netherlands, under Article 120, it actually restricts the practice of judicial review. And this is why the system in the United States is so important, because they respond to these certain precedents that the Supreme Court makes.
However, individual opinions can make their way onto the Supreme Court, such as in Lawrence versus Texas. Justice Scalia explicitly wrote that the Supreme Court shall never sway to the homosexual whims, which is he directly imposed his views on homosexuality onto the Supreme Court instead of taking a wide lens on the Constitution.
So should justices use judicial restraint as much as possible and sort of defer to the elected branches of government whenever possible? Or do they have a responsibility to rule on everything that comes in front of them?
While they don't have a responsibility to rule on every single case that comes before them, they do have a responsibility to make changes to the Constitution, to rule on cases that even if a part of the legislature or Congress could have a say in this, because we have the checks where later on, if the Supreme Court ruled against a part of a bill, Congress could then rewrite that part of the bill, and there are continuous checks to make sure that things remain constitutional.
Well, an important job of the Supreme Court is to ensure that federalism can protect the individual of everybody in the country, and that there's no controversies where the circuits are splitting themselves in one opinion to another in a jurisdiction. So it's the duty of the Supreme Court to uphold that balance of federalism, such as a circuit split that's on the Supreme Court's agenda currently is with the 11th Circuit and the 5th Circuit, which disagree on how much a reasonable privacy inmates expect when talking to their lawyers. So this must be addressed by the Supreme Court to uphold our stability of federalism.
How much time do we have left, John?
Got 10 seconds.
Oh,
good
we can't
job.
do a question at that point. Oh, man.
Well, let's all give the students a round of applause for their hard work and their
I was
participation
wondering.
today.
You guys did a fantastic job. That was so much fun, and I apologize for cutting you off. Is it Soha?
No problem.
Is that how I pronounce your name?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
You
So
got it.
I apologize for that because I wanted to get to the point. Also, it was because I wanted to get to it was just a lot of fun. I kind of stopped taking notes because this was so much fun, and you could just tell the depth of understanding that you all have, whether it was your in-depth knowledge of like Article 3 and how the court is constituted and their jurisdiction status, or coming back at me and being like, individual liberty and collective liberty can also be increased, and also you're wrong. So I appreciate you guys did a great job, and it did a great job supporting your arguments as well. So I'll let my other fellow judges give their comments now.
Yeah, hey everyone, great job. Enjoyed your presentation. Enjoyed the follow-up questions and hearing your responses. You know, one thing that's always impressed me about We the People is when, you know, high school students will say something that I, as a practicing civil rights attorney, wouldn't have thought of. You know, and like you mentioned the circuit split, and I can tell you as a practicing attorney, that's something that exists, and it's a very real thing. And that's, you know, I think in all my years doing this with the people, I haven't heard anyone mention that. So good point. You're definitely reading and studying. Yeah, I can tell you put a lot of time into it, and you all are paying attention. Great job.
Yes, I also think you did a fabulous job. I really wish we had more time to kind of go into the notion of incorporation, because you're like the first group that actually brought up the concept of incorporation and how that applies here with issues of federalism. So if we had more time, that would be like a great place to just keep going with that. So I'm really happy you brought that up. Numerous cases that you brought up, Federalist Papers. I like that you have really older cases kind of rooted in the history, and then a lot of contemporary cases. I enjoyed the discussion and the follow-up between the notion of, you know, collective rights. And then you just had some specific responses, which I like to see when sometimes we ask questions, sometimes you'll get really general responses, but you had very specifics, like, you know, so you suggested a supermajority for the nomination process. I mean, we could spend more time talking about whether, you know, that's a good thing or bad thing or whatever, but you had something very specific that you suggested, that not just, yes, it should be changed. And you also had, you know, the idea with the 18-year term limit. And you talked about the filibuster. But the thing that I really thought was most interesting that I circled here is when you did talk about the circuit split, because that's an important situation. You know, we have a Supreme Court for a reason, and those are specifically times when they will most likely take a case, is when you do have these circuits split, because somebody needs to have a final ruling for the country on how we're going to interpret that federal law. So I was really excited that that you brought that up, and then you tied it to a very specific example that's happening today. So that was fabulous. So thank you so much for sharing your information with us today. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, excellent presentation for all of you. You should be very, very proud of yourselves.
Great job, everyone.
Thank you.